In the mid-2000s, film director and writer Christopher Nolan had famously revived the iconic Caped Crusader himself with Batman Begins in 2005, resulting in the film earning a sequel in 2008. And much like its starting film, The Dark Knight was also to receive a licensed video game to coincide with the release of the film. But while the game sadly never came to be released or even officially announced, several ideas behind its development would ultimately lead to the creation of what many people consider one of the greatest, if not the greatest, game series of all time. But it all started with the game that never came to pass. As the Dark Knight film was being greenlit by Warner Bros., Elevision Partners had acquired the licensing for a tie-in Dark Knight video game, with Pandemic Studios as the development team and Electronic Arts, or EA the studios, as the publishing team. EA and Pandemic had already made a name for themselves with the successful releases of the Destroy All Humans and the Star Wars Battlefront series in the early 2000s, and EA having previously published the Batman Begins tie-in game. With acquiring the licensing, developing and publishing teams, as well as principal photography of the film starting in September of 2006, the development behind Batman The Dark Knight had officially begun. As the development went on for the game, the Brisbane branch of Pandemic Studios worked on a newly envisioned game engine entitled Odin, designed primarily to construct highly detailed open-ended world maps, which they felt would fit the dark, grim and gritty realism of Christopher Nolan's world. And by the end of 2007, all of the game's assets were transferred into the Odin engine. This, however, created several unforeseen technical problems and it ultimately destroyed the development, mainly starting when the Batman character model was imported into the engine itself, which resulted in massive frame rate drops, and whenever more character models were added into the engine, the frame rate would drop even further down, and continuous crashes would follow along suit. The unexpected technical issues meant the game could not be released alongside with the film, much unlike its predecessor. As a result of this, many development issues would follow soon after. Members quitting the company, delaying the game's release to December to coincide with the film's DVD release, and while Pandemic would eventually use this extra time to attempt to fix the technical problems, there would still be several software bugs and points of slowdown, which were ultimately left unresolved. Eventually, the game's production was in so much disarray with technical bugs, software issues, as well as lighting and frame rate glitches, it didn't really seem like this game would ever see the light of day, or even get off the ground. To make matters even worse, famous film actor Gary Oldman, who played Jim Gordon in the Dark Knight films, visited the development studio to see the progress they had made over these past few months, and had explained in an interview what he had seen, unaware that the game's development was supposed to be a secret. And while EA had expanded the development team on it to about 100 more members, it was still not enough to save the game. With many technical problems still there, bugs, errors, frame rate drops, barely anybody really having a chance to work on it, the game was ultimately cancelled. Eventually in 2009, articles were published regarding the game's development from a Pandemic insider, and later in 2016, the YouTube channel Did You Know Gaming had released a video explaining much more of its development, with the prototype gameplay footage and even concept art being released. Games Radar Plus had even thought it was an interesting idea to see the Dark Knight game that could have been, with GameSpot even calling its cancellation unfortunate. But, as we all know, that was not the end for Batman in the video game genre. In spring of 2007, Eidos Interactive had also acquired the rights to develop a Batman game, and had approached, at the time, a little-known game company, Rocksteady Studios, and by May of the same year, they had already begun development of the game's concept. Founded in December of 2004 by pre-shutdown Argonaut Games employees Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker, as well as several of the other employees who also worked at the same company but had been fired later as well due to its shutdown, they had only one game under their development name, Urban Chaos Riot Response, a first-person shooter released on the original Xbox and PlayStation 2 in 2006. The player would control a member of a newly formed Riot Control Squad to retake an unnamed city controlled by a large gang organization. However, the game received average reviews at best by most critics and general gamers on both of the platforms. Using a few of the elements that were created in the Secret Dark Knight game at the time, including an open-ended world as opposed to a linear map design, DC had then approached the legendary comics and Batman the Animated Series writer Paul Dini to work on the game's story, and with that, the plotting around Batman Arkham Asylum had begun. While they started development with only 40 members in total and the deadline of mid-2009 to finish and release the game, their main concern, as well as one of their biggest challenges, was the gameplay style. The system had went through 3 separate iterations, with the original idea as a rhythm-based action game, then later redesigned as a 2D setting involving coloured circles crashing into each other during combat segments. The final iteration created the same 2D model as a baseline, and then the combat was designed around the kind of style that was unique to Batman, and was then given a similar control scheme to other successful licensed superhero games such as Spider-Man 2 and Batman Begins. The game was then built on the Unreal 3 engine to best support the well-detailed environments, the physics engine, as well as the many technical issues that previously halted the development of the unsuccessful unreleased Dark Knight game, with one developer apparently spending 2 years programming the physics on Batman's cape alone, using over 700 animations and sound effects to make it move as realistically as possible. For the main design aspect of the game, instead of it being adapted from any kind of comic book, film, or TV show at the time, due to the licensing being a bit hard to acquire, DC wanted Paul Dini to create his own original story with loose inspiration from the Grant Morrison comic Arkham Asylum, a series house on Sirius Earth, mainly when it came to the dark atmosphere, layout, and design style of the Arkham Island map, with a few other design elements also being influenced by the first Bioshock installment. Also, again, due to not having the full rights to any of the film interpretations of the Batman characters, mainly designs for his Rogues Gallery, Rocksteady opted to create their own iterations of these designs, with the Joker being the closest likeness to the art style of famous comic book artist Jim Lee.
First thing we did is we just dived straight into the comic book history. You know, we bought everything we could get our hands on. We just piled up a massive stash of comics and just read through them all to really get a feel for this character.
For designing the open world aesthetics, the developers chose the Arkham Asylum prison as the open world setting because it would present a closed-off, confined feeling to the player, surrounded by several enemies instead of creating a game with an open city map, which they felt wouldn't create the same confined and claustrophobic feeling as Arkham Asylum. Nor would it be very challenging for the player, since fighting a large group of enemies could be avoided simply by returning to the Batcave, or just dropping a smoke bomb, or making a quick getaway in the Batmobile. While Rocksteady didn't exactly have the rights to any of the design styles of the film, TV, or comic book adaptations, they did at least want to have iconic aspects of the Batman mythos, mainly in the voice casting department. They had already decided very early on in the game's development process to have the characters Batman, Joker, and Harley Quinn voiced by their respective animated series actors Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, and Arlene Sorkin, with Hamill reportedly having the most recorded lines compared to the rest of the voice cast, and portraying the character in a much darker and more mature tone, but still retaining the traditional playful clown-like nature of the character that he was known for. Several other variable and talented actors were brought in to voice the various other common characters in the Batman mythos, such as the legendary voice actor Steve Bloom as Killer Croc, Tom Kane as Jim Gordon, Kimberly Brooks as Oracle, Dino Andrade as Scarecrow, and Wally Wingert as the Riddler. After a few rewrites by Dini and several of the other writing staff on the department of Rocksteady, the main story had the game centered around Batman returning with the Joker to Arkham Island after an attack on the Gotham City Central, as well as an attack on the city mayor. However, as returning to the asylum, Joker breaks free, and with the help of Harley Quinn and some more of Batman's heavy-hitting rogues gallery, they planned to take over the island and eventually storm the rest of Gotham City. Without getting into many spoilers, that is the general gist of the plot. And with that, all the development, designing, casting, and all the bugs ironed out, Batman Arkham Asylum was released on August 25th of 2009 on the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. While people were very excited about the game's release due to the really great marketing of the game, they were also a little bit skeptical. At the time, superhero games, especially licensed superhero games, were mostly received very poorly by the gaming community, so gamers were not really expecting this game to be really good. At the time, the best games out there were the licensed game Batman Begins, Spider-Man 2, and oddly enough, Lego Batman. Yes, a child game was much better than a licensed video game for adults. But aside from that, there were so many bad games that had outweighed the good ones completely, with many of the other ones falling by the wayside as being just blatant cash grabs. Terrible licensed games such as Catwoman, Spider-Man 3, and the many licensed games based off the first 3 MCU titles didn't exactly sway the public that licensed superhero games, or just superhero games in general, could be anything good. So the skepticism was definitely well warranted. But what release had far exceeded everybody's expectations. Batman Arkham Asylum was critically acclaimed by both critics and gamers alike, both gamers and Batman fans that had read the comics, watched the cartoon, watched the films, and just grown up with the character for years, had loved this game to pieces. It eventually received a 92% on Metacritic, 9.2 out of 10 on IGN, and a 9 out of 10 on GameSpot. Both regular gamers and fans of Batman praised the game for being an absolute love letter to both the character and his mythos and his legendary status, and being deemed not only one of the greatest superhero games of all time, if not the greatest, but also one of the best games in general. The game was eventually nominated and accepted as the Game of the Year in 2009, eventually receiving its own Game of the Year special edition later on at the beginning of 2010, and cemented Batman as a true staying and truly profitable IP for both Warner Bros., DC, and gaming all around the world. By the time this game came out, I was so excited to play it, and it's so in love with Batman. I bought it on not just the Xbox 360, but also my PS3, at least when it would actually run at the time. I absolutely fell in love with the gameplay, the art design, the villains, the boss fights, the combat, the stealth mechanics, all the extra challenge maps, as well as the exclusive content on the PS3 that allows you to play as the Joker. In my opinion, it was one of the best, if not the absolute best Batman experience I had ever had. I played this game for hours and hours on end after school, and even years later I would still play it. Even when the sequels and the Arkham Origins prequel had come out, I'd still find myself revisiting this game, eventually playing it on PC in 2013. And even when I finally got my hands on Arkham Knight for the PC, and it actually managed to run for me, I would still play Arkham Asylum just to get a sense of how good it felt to play that game all the way back in 2009, and just how great it felt to play as this character. In my personal opinion, I think this is probably my absolute favorite of the Arkham games. And I know a lot of people can generally say either Arkham Knight or Arkham City is the best, definitively. And in some respects, as a critical level, I would definitely agree with that statement. However, on a personal level, this is my absolute favorite. It just brought a lot of what I loved about the character, both as a kid and as an adult now. I generally enjoy all the love and attention that went into this game. I love the Art Deco style that resembles the graphic novelization of the Arkham Asylum comic, as well as the creep art style that reminds me a bit of the animated series. But it also has the classic comic book tone as well that you'd see in something, say, like Batman 1989. This also feels like just a love letter for people who grew up with the animated series as well, being helped by the fact that we have Kevin Conroy, Arlene Sorkin, and Mark Hamill reprising their roles as their respective characters from the animated series. I absolutely adore every nook and cranny that went into making this game. I love the level design, I love the backgrounds, I love design style of the character models, I love the combat. The combat is so fluid and responsive in this game. I know a lot of people can say Arkham City did it better, which I definitely do agree. I think Arkham Asylum is probably the most fluent and the most responsive. Maybe beaten up sometimes by Arkham Origins, just how really intense and really realistic it sounds. But I personally have a soft spot for the way the combat is very fresh and new at the time for gaming as a whole. You can definitely tell this game was very inspirational for a lot of other games that would take advantage of this. Even the Assassin's Creed series at the time, which had this similar combat style, at least in terms of the stealth mechanics and the detective mode vision, as they would use, or I think it was called the thief vision in their case. But the combat style wouldn't be taken from this game until later on in the Assassin's Creed series, since I think Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. And eventually, it would pave the way for other gaming studios to use this similar combat style, such as the game Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor and its eventual sequel in 2017, Middle-earth: Shadow of War. The stealth mechanics are also what makes this game so memorable, and also what made this game synonymous for feeling like you were playing Batman, where you felt like you were in Batman's shoes. You would be swinging around gargoyles, just flying down Superman by the throat and just hang them off at the vantage points. You'd be gliding down to give them a nice massive kick in the back. You'd be taking them down with stealth takedowns. You'd be tripping them over with batarangs and blowing them walls in their faces with the explosive gel. You'd be kicking them right in the face with the line launcher. You'd be using so many of these new and impressive but also very old and classic gadgets that Batman is known for. It truly felt like you were the Batman. The only thing people really wanted that this game couldn't deliver, unfortunately, which was very understandable why they couldn't, was the use of the Batmobile, which at the time was very much obvious. The map was very enclosed and it was very claustrophobic, and also the technology and the engine at the time just wasn't really that high-tech enough or very advanced enough to handle the Batmobile's mechanics, and they just didn't really know how to interpret the Batmobile in this case. In terms of the actual story, I really enjoy how this game has several plot points that weirdly enough connect to each other once you get to the very end. And once you put the pieces together, you'd see all these segments in the game actually correlate with each other. You can see the beginning, it's all this mystery of how Joker's escaped and how Joker's got this much control of the asylum and how he's managed to free all these classic Batman villains and why he's doing what he's doing, or what his motivation is. Eventually you get to the medical facility and then the Arkham Mansion, where you realize his true purpose for taking over the island. And eventually when you get to say the penitentiary and the botanical gardens, back to the intensive treatment building, and then into the sewers again, you really do get a sense that all these segments in the game are well connected and fit the story. This is actually something that, unfortunately, the sequel, Arkham City, doesn't really do as well. I generally didn't feel like Arkham City really had all the plot points like correlate with each other that formed a very well put together story, or even just a well put together concept. But to be fair, that's a whole other different video entirely. Asylum's overall atmosphere is also what makes it so memorable and so enjoyable. It very much feels like an enclosed claustrophobic area. You really feel like there's a thug around every corner, or there's an enemy around every corner. You generally don't know what was about to come around a certain door or a certain hallway. You could be freaked out at one minute, then just be jump scared by, say, Scarecrow. You could be attacked by Bane out of nowhere. You could be stalked to death by Killer Croc. It was insane. I get a lot of the reputation this game's layout has when people often reference it to being sort of like Batman and Alcatraz. I definitely see that comparison. As for the combat itself, it's definitely really good. It certainly isn't the best, obviously, but it is definitely a really good first start. You have so many of these different gadgets to use from. Standardly, of course, you have the Batarang and the triple Batarangs. You have the cryptographic sequencer, the line launcher, the explosive gel, the sonic Batarang, the remote control Batarang, and many others. You also get an upgrade system here, which, well, yes, I think other Batman games did have this. It's better refined here. You get a plentiful amount of combat-related, gadget-related, and HP-related upgrades. Unfortunately, the only part of the upgrade system I wish was improved upon, at least could have had more elements to it, were the stealth upgrades. There's only one stealth-based upgrade, and that's to have takedowns via vantage points. I wish there could have been more ways to have like stealth takedowns, or maybe just like have certain stealth mechanics thrown in, or just generally just a few other stealth upgrades, aside from just one. Maybe a couple more. I get the fact that they couldn't really think of many. They were mostly focusing on the combat and the gadgets themselves. I get that, but the stealth is another big part of this game's big gameplay mechanics, so I would have at least liked to see a bit more variety in terms of the stealth upgrades department. I love that every building has its own unique style and layout. So does the intensive treatment building, which has a more advanced but also very, for lack of a better word, intense looking prison facility. You have the medical facility, which looks very run down and very old and decrepit, especially when you get to the bottom part, which leads to the creepiest and, in my opinion, the most scariest scene of the entire game. If there's one part of this game that I can potentially agree with everybody, it's with the boss fights. When it comes to the boss fights, they can be hit and miss depending on what you're looking for. There are 4 main big boss fights in the game, and that is Killer Croc, Bane, Poison Ivy, and the Joker. But first, let's look at the smaller ones you fight, the Titan henchmen you could fight throughout many points in the game's story. The Titan henchmen are essentially bigger, dumber enemies to fight, but they're very fun enemies to fight. They essentially become from one small boss fight into a few mini boss fights. The Titan boss fights are essentially, they charge at you, you hit them with the Batarang, you get on top of their backs, and you just ride around like you're playing whack-a-mole. Admittedly, they are very fun boss fights and very fun mini boss fights, and I do really enjoy them, even if they are very simplistic. The main boss fights, however, are a different story. I'll go through them in chronological order through the story. Let's take a look at the first one, and it's probably the one that set the standard for the Titan boss fights, actually, Bane.
The bat is broken!
Bane is a very simple boss fight, but I think it's supposed to be a very simple boss fight to get a handle on. Basically, it's essentially the same way you would take out the Titan boss fights in the future part of the game. Except in this point, you would get on his back and you wouldn't ride him, but you'd take out one of his venom tubes. 3 hits like this and he's down. He's completely easy to fight. Even on the hardest setting, when one part of his health bar can take up to 3 hits to the wall, and then you take out one of his venom tubes, it's still relatively easy and simple, and very quick. However, it gets a little bit more interesting when you fight, or rather not fight, Killer Croc.
Tick-tock, feed the Croc.
Killer Croc is one of the boss fights where you don't actually fight him head on, and this is actually one of the boss fights that has stuck with a lot of people for many points in the Arkham series. When they think of good boss fights, they go to this one in the sense that this is not particularly a boss fight, but this essentially is a good boss. Let me explain. You don't actually get to fight him head on. You essentially go through a giant sewer maze, and the only way to fight him or run or essentially avoid him is by waiting for him to jump up onto the surface platforms and knock him down back into the water with a batarang. I'll admit, the first time playing through this is quite creepy and quite suspenseful. It really builds up the fact that you have no idea where the hell he's gonna pop up, and in some cases you actually don't. He can pop up at any time. And yes, while there are some scripted parts, there are some parts of this segment of the game where you have no idea if he's going to pop up to these platforms or not. You have no idea if he's going to pop up. You have no idea if he's just going to start breaking the surface boards, allowing you to use the line launcher. And I love the nice little detail when you use the line launcher and there's a gap of water under it. Right? He will try and grab you. I love that little detail. As a boss fight, it's not much of a fight, but as an actual enemy, it's a really well done segment. So I definitely count this as a boss fight, just not a typical boss fight that you would usually see in, say, Arkham City, or even some other games like along down the line of like in the video game genre. But it's really fun nonetheless. The third big one is Poison Ivy.
You're dead and buried, darling.
This is a very unique type of boss fight. In the visual sense, it's a very unique location, and she is a very unique way of attacking you. She doesn't, again, much like Killer Croc, she doesn't attack you head on directly. She sends out vines into the ground to try and snare you and try to kill you, allowing you to try and break free. In the second part of the boss fight, she sends out henchmen to try and take you down. These are actually mind-controlled security guards. Where she got these guards and why they're not dead from all the other goons trying to kill them is anyone's guess, but either way, it doesn't matter. Either way, you have to get the bar low enough so she'll basically crash down to the surface and you spray explosive gel, or in this case the venom cure, in order to take it down. Do this twice and it's over. However, I do like the dialogue they give her. Sometimes it's quite funny. I like the fact that you are fighting security guards. It's quite different. Hell, this might have been a bit of a hint of what would come in the DLC, exclusive PS3 DLC you would get while playing as the Joker in the challenge maps. Overall, it's not bad. It's pretty decent. It's a good spectacle, but there's nothing much to it. Much like the Killer Croc boss fight and the Bane boss fight. Before we get to the final boss fight, I want to talk about a segment that isn't a boss fight in actuality, but much like Killer Croc, is a very well done segment. It's the most memorable part about this game. The Scarecrow Segments.
Now madness takes you forever.
There are 3 segments in this particular. One of them is quite creepy and quite terrifying, and it leads into the medical facility. The medical facility overall is okay. It's not a bad segment of the game. It's actually quite enjoyable. One of my favorites, in fact. However, when you get to the lower section of the building, it starts to get really creepy. All of a sudden, you are hit with some type of gas that makes you see your worst fear. And in this case, it's you failing your mission and trying to rescue Gordon. He's ended up dead, and you have no idea what the hell to do. You can't get in touch with Oracle. You go into this morgue, which is super creepy. It's atmospheric, yes, but it's that droning, whispery-like voice. You go through the same door you just went through earlier, and all of a sudden, you're back in the morgue, this time with 3 bodies on the table. Once you open up 2 of the body bags, showing your dead parents, the third one is Scarecrow and jump scares you. Once you come to, you are now in his world.
Boy, little bat, you're in my world now.
This segment is really well done, and in my opinion is probably the best part of the entire game. I agree with everybody on that front. It's visually stunning. It has a really drony music. It almost kind of reminds me of that droning soundtrack that Christopher Nolan used for the Joker in The Dark Knight. And overall, just it has a creepy vibe to it. I especially love the background itself. It's almost like you're in a swirling vortex, like you're in the middle of a hurricane, but it's very otherworldly as well, and I love that. This segment happens again when you're in the Arkham Mansion, and it's a very cool twist on it. Instead of actually going into the Scarecrow's world immediately, you're actually hit with another flashback scene, except this time you're in Wayne Manor, but it slowly dissolves into the alleyway where Bruce's parents were killed. Overall, it's a very well done segment of the game, and there's very little dialogue aside from the parents' dialogue and a bit of dialogue from Commissioner Gordon at the end. And as soon as you open the door at the very end of this segment, you are back in this world. And again, visually it's stunning, but it has a new twist. But it adds another element of it where you fight some goons who I believe are basically being knocked down in the real world, but in this world you're seeing them as skeletons. And I love that design choice. But it's the third segment that really gets everybody, and everybody who's ever played this for the first time has legitimate thought that this was a real thing.
Did anyone catch the game last night?
The game crashes. It loads up the first cutscene of the game, except this time it's Joker driving and Batman is in the cuffs. All of a sudden, Joker and the Psychos and the rest of the rogues have taken over the facility, and the rest of the security officers, including Gordon, Sharp, some of the security guards you've met, and Dr. Young and everyone else are going to be killed. It all ends in a surprise where apparently a fake death scene happens, and apparently you have to use the middle stick, and then all of a sudden you're shown a grave with Batman's name on it. Or rather, Bruce Wayne's grave. Batman's hand rises from the ground, and all of a sudden we're back into Scarecrow's reality for the third and final time.
I think you need a little more. Tell me, what demons do you have left to beat? Shall we see?
I'm not gonna lie, playing this for the first time, or playing it again for a few more times afterwards, I legit was shocked at a middle stick. I legit thought, where the hell is this middle stick on the gamepad? But easily the worst reviewed boss fight in this entire game is the Joker Titan boss fight.
Who else wants to get crazy?
Titan Joker has been regarded as this game's worst element of all time. People have spent years talking about how this is one of the worst boss fights, not only in the game, but also the entire series in general. And I'm here to say that I do agree on some level. Yes, it's not great, but it's not that terrible either. I would give credit. Overall, Joker's personality and Mark Hamill's voice directing is very well done, and it helps this boss fight at least be memorable on a funny standpoint. That and the overall set piece of it being in a big style arena with Joker's face on the floor, I quite like that. That's pretty decent. Overall, Joker's commentary is also pretty funny too. Aside from that though, yeah, it's not really that fun. It's just basically you running around while Joker tries to hit you with his big fingernail. Seriously, what the fuck is up with that? And then jumping up to try and impress helicopters while you fight henchmen on the ground. Overall, it's not a great boss fight at all, but it's just okay. It's not bad for me, and I do still have a soft spot for it. And let's be honest, it's definitely not the worst boss fight in the game series. I think that either goes to Deathstroke or... Yeah, no, it goes to Deathstroke from Arkham Knight. Seriously, Rocksteady, you fucked that one up.
I can take it. I can take anything you throw at me, Bats. You can't beat me. I'm actually going to win. Ready for the next round?
Always.
What?
I'll never let you win. Never.
Aside from that though, I absolutely love every bit about this game. I love the challenge maps, I love the story, I love the presentation, I love the graphics, I love the design of it, I love the voice cast, I love the gameplay, the stealth, the combat. I love what this did for not just the Arkham game series, but for also just gaming in general. It set the gold standard for licensed games and licensed superhero games, or just superhero games in general. So much though that several games in the future, and superhero games in the future, are trying to copy what Arkham Asylum did right. They can all do it, and you know what? Some of them can even succeed and even surpass Arkham Asylum, in my opinion. For example, maybe Spider-Man on PS4, or maybe Arkham Origins, possibly. But I will not deny that this was the first one that did it, and this is, in my opinion, my absolute favorite of all the Arkham games. I easily give this game a 9 out of 10. It's dragged down from being a 10 out of 10 because yes, it's not perfect. The boss fights are a little hit and miss depending on what you're looking for. And yes, the combat isn't as refined as it would be in the later games. But honestly, as a first outing for Rocksteady and Warner Bros. And DC and just Batman in the gaming community, it works tremendously. It's a fantastic game. If you're looking for an authentic Batman experience, then much like the animated series, how it combined a lot of elements like the dramatic tones of the Burton films and some of the comic books, or the goofy nature of the 60s Batman style, and if you're looking for a really good blend of it, just like the animated series, then play Arkham Asylum. It is definitely worth it. Either play it on PC or the Return to Arkham on PS4 and Xbox One, or the newest series consoles. I highly recommend it. I absolutely adore this game from beginning to end, and I have adored it for almost 15 years. Before we wrap this up, I also want to pay respects to, in my opinion, I think I'll look for a lot of everybody else's opinion, the best person to ever play our favorite Cape Crusader himself. For 30 years, Kevin Conroy lent his voice to a character that, while yes, very popular thanks to the Burton films, would never be as big as he was in the animated series. It's hard to imagine the fact that for 30 years, Kevin Conroy has voiced this character in cartoons and animated films and games, and at one point has played this character in live action with the CW crossover event Crisis on Infinite Earths. And your opinion on that is just your own. I personally don't think it was very good. It's the performance from Kevin Conroy, and Conroy just did a fantastic job with every iteration of the character he was chosen to portray. Whether it was the original animated series, the new adventure series, the Justice League cartoon, the multitude of games he was brought in, or if it was just another animated film in the long lineup of animated films that DC has been throwing out since probably 2010. We can think of some great we can think of some great voice actors that have portrayed the Cape Crusader for a long time. You can think of so many other voice actors that have portrayed this character, and all of them do really good as well, don't get me wrong. Voice actors like Ben McKenzie for the animated Batman Year One, version of the character. Peter Weller did a pretty good job in Batman The Dark Knight Returns animated film. Of course, we know of Jason Ackles' recent portrayal of the character for the animated films recently. And of course, the actor who's portrayed both the hero and the villain in this case, Troy Baker, in many versions of this character. They've all done a really damn good job. But none of them have done so much of a good job with the role, and none of them have been as iconic as Kevin Conroy. Even the one that arguably made the character a big name back in the 60s, Adam West. And yes, I hold he's a special place in my heart because he was the first Batman I actually watched. The 60s Batman movie was the first Batman thing I ever watched. So it wasn't the animated series I technically started out with, it was that 60s film. And that holds a special place in my heart. But Conroy just nailed it. Every time he played the character, even if the film wasn't really that good, like say Batman the Killing Joke, he would still do a really good job with the role. And he would do a fantastic performance. And while yes, a few things recently have said that he did not enjoy his time on the Arkham games, I think overall his performance in the Arkham games are probably his best ever. I think in particular Arkham Asylum, where he has this, it's a return to form for him, I think, because keep in mind, he was a bit absent from the role of the character for a good long while, almost the same amount of time as Mark Hamill was away from this role, and Arlene Sorkin for that matter. This was the equivalent of hearing Peter Cullen's voice as Optimus Prime in the first live-action Transformers movie. It was just so awesome to hear that voice again. The voice that a lot of people grew up with. And for many people, including myself, whenever we would read a DC comic that had Batman or the Joker in, we'd hear these iconic voices. We would hear Mark Hamill's voice cut him out of the Joker. We would hear Kevin Conroy's voice out of Batman. We would hear other ones. And that's just how much of an impact Kevin made on the role as Batman. I don't think I can even express it through words how much of a great actor he was and how much his performance for the character meant to people like me. I've grown up with this character for years, and whenever I would need a Batman performance, or whenever I would need a Batman project just to watch or play, I'd always go to one with Kevin Conroy because he was, in my opinion, the best Batman actor. I know people like to joke on the fact that he's technically not a Batman actor because he's never played the character live action. Again, right now with the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover from the CW, that argument's a bit out the window right now, but still, it doesn't matter. Whether live action or animated, whether video games or cartoons, film or TV show, either way, they are an actor for this character. And there are just some actors you immediately associate with one character. There's always the first one you will always think of. And for a lot of people, including myself, when you think of Batman, the voice you hear is Kevin Conroy. For 30 straight years, he was Batman for me and a lot of other people. And it's very sad to say that on the 10th of November 2022, Kevin Conroy sadly passed away due to complications of a battle with cancer. He will truly be missed by practically everybody who knew the character, who knew the actor. It is such a tragedy to lose an iconic actor, an iconic person in media like Kevin. I really don't think there will be any other actor for Batman like him. That's not to say all he's had is just Batman. He's voiced a lot of other characters in animation over the years, and all of them are really good. But everybody always goes back to Batman for him, and quite frankly, so do I. And nowadays, when I watch the animated series or watch the Justice League cartoon or even play these games, I'll feel a little sad because this is the legacy he's left behind, and this is what we will remember him by. And this is exactly why I've wanted to do a full retrospective on not just Arkham Asylum, but the whole Arkham series in general. Yes, including Arkham Origins. For a lot of people, there are just some people in life that, like in fiction, these actors and characters that hold a special place in people's hearts. And Kevin was one of them for me. I just don't know what else to say other than he was my favorite Batman. He will forever be my favorite Batman.
I am vengeance. I am the Knight. I am Batman.
People come up to me all the time and just want to grab me and hug me because they know me. I've shared my deepest emotional life with them through my performance, through my voice. So the advice I would give to the next person who comes along to voice Batman is don't, because I'm still here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
It's done. Gotham is safe.
Thank you, Bruce, for everything.
Goodbye, Jim.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and share with people you know, and comment down below what you want me to look at next, either be a let's play or a review or a retrospective or whatever. If you enjoyed it, once again, please subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date on all the latest retro content, and I'll see you all in the next video.